The Montreal Canadiens, they're ingrained. It's been such a part of our culture.
Le bleu, blanc, rouge, le Saint-Fanal, le tricolore, you know, the Habs, you know, the CH, les glorieux.
I think the Montreal Canadiens are part of the fabric of our nation.
This is more than a team. This is part of our identity. This is who we are.
They've had a glorious history. They've won 24 Stanley Cups.
They matter. In 2 words, that's the best way to put it.
Welcome to the Montreal Canadiens. 100 years and 100 stars. A look at the most storied franchise in hockey history. My name is George Sorombelopoulos, and here we are at the Bell Center in Montreal. I'm not going to lie to you. As a kid growing up in Toronto, the hockey rink in Montreal, that was my cathedral. Now, when our team has been around for 100 years, you have to know they've had a major impact on their community. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, the Habs throughout the decades. We're going to talk to the players, past and present. We're also going to talk to lots of stars, musicians and artists who grew up inspired by the Montreal Canadiens. And perhaps the most interesting part of the story of Le Bleu, Blanc et Rouge is the relationship that the Canadiens have had with the city of Montreal, an artistic hotbed and the cultural heartbeat of this country. All right, so everybody knows that the Montreal Canadiens have won 24 Stanley Cups, and if you didn't know that, well, chances are some drunk Habs fan has bothered you about it in a bar somewhere. But what most people don't know is that the city of Montreal has actually experienced championships with teams like the Victorias or the Shamrocks or the Maroons or the Wanderers, and they did it in this rink right here called Westmount Arena.
It's Goodbye Broadway. Hello, Montreal.
For a very long time, the French factor in Quebec was outside of the city of Montreal. Anyone who would have come to the city of Montreal in the early 20th century would have been convinced that it was a totally English city.
In 1909, Montreal was indeed 2 solitudes. The English enjoyed music halls and vaudeville, while French Canadians favored something altogether different.
The cultural heroes of the early 20th century for French Canadians were actually opera singers. Napoléon Bisson, Raoul Jobin, Richard Véraud, Pierrette Allary. They were representatives of Quebec culture. They sang at the Met. They sang at Covent Garden.
In 1909, an English-Canadian businessman had a novel idea. A new team made up entirely of French-Canadian players called Les Canadiens. Thing is, the French-only experiment didn't last very long, and soon the English players were skating alongside the French players, and that mix would prove to be a very successful formula for the next century.
The early Habs played through the Great War, U.S. Prohibition. Americans flock north for a good time, and Montreal's reputation for great nightlife is born. During the era, Canadians win 4 Stanley Cups with French-Canadian stars like Auriel Joliette and George Vezina.
And interestingly enough, the Habs' first true genuine superstar was an English kid from Stratford, Ontario. His name was Howie Morenz.
The Canadiens, number 7.
Living here in Stratford, we're very connected to the Habs because Howie Morenz is from here. There is that straight genealogical line between Howie and straight to Montreal.
What we knew was the legend of Howie Morenz and of dying as a result of an injury. You know, having the funeral at the Forum.
Every kid who plays on the Cullitons here in Stratford will claim a bit of Howie Morenz's hockey jersey or his hockey sweater à la Rock Carrière.
We all wore the same costume as Maurice Richard did.
Every kid on the rink had a Habs jersey, you know, and someone liked the hockey sweater.
One of the first books I read coming to Canada was Rock Carrier's the hockey sweater.
I had always worn the red, white, and blue sweater of the Montreal Canadiens. All my friends wore the red, white, and blue sweater.
My parents, who came from South Africa, first bought me a Boston Bruins jersey in the late 1970s and sent me out like that, and I quickly realized that there was no other team to cheer for besides the Habs.
He became somebody that we want to imitate. We would be 8 or 10 guys on this little ring and waiting if we had half an hour before going to Mass on Sunday morning. One was Maurice. I've always been Elmer Lack.
We all pretended to be Gump Worsley and Cournoyer and Lafleur, and we were hopeless, utterly hopeless.
I was always Guy Lafleur. I was always stepping across the blue line and taking the big slap shot. It never worked out that well for me at game time, but
outside of my house, road hockey was king.
I used to look up to Ken Dryden, number 29.
I'd put my chin on the stick, and I would dream about being Ken Dryden.
The pucks hurt too much when they came on your body, so I decided to make a career change and go into singing.
To the horror of all my neighbors and friends, I was secretly a Montreal Canadiens fan. I wore a Montreal Canadiens jersey in Toronto. So this was like the reverse of the hockey sweater.
You know, it's hard to imagine when you look at the Forum today, but you know, in the 50s and 60s, this might have been the most important building in the city, and this was the shrine of hockey. For all the great stars that played here over the 70 years, this building truly belongs to Maurice Rocket Richard. And he was way more than just a hockey player. He became a cultural icon for the Quebecois, a working-class guy from the east end of Montreal who went on to become the greatest player of his era.
Whack at it, Maurice Richard right in front of the score!
I think hockey became, for a lot of French Canadians, a way to win something. And he was the perfect image of that. He was a winner.
They meant so much to the people in Montreal and to the people in the province of Quebec.
It was more than just a hockey team, I guess. It had a kind of political and cultural life as well.
This man woke up the pride of the French Canadians, which were pretty much treated as second-class citizens. I think hockey became, for a lot of French Canadians, a way out. A lot like basketball was for blacks in America.
I think the fact that Jackie Robinson and the Rocket were in the same town, representing the same thing for different people, it says something about that period in history and this city.
He made history, and rightly so, being the first black player to play in the Major League. He loved Montreal because he was treated so much better in Montreal than he was in a lot of other places.
I remember the time that I had gone with my dad to see Jackie play. My father, I could see how proud he was. His chest swelled with that pride of seeing the first black player. And very, very much the same thing would apply to music, because so many of the American players, they had never been on the bandstand with white players.
Had there not been Oliver Jones and an Oscar Peterson, I don't think I'd be here. Oscar was to jazz what Maurice Richard was to hockey. What an incredible fluke that a kid from Saint-Henri would become the biggest jazz star in the world.
Of course, in Montreal, we probably had around 600 clubs. It was truly the Paris of North America.
It was great. They had the top entertainers from the United States performing there.
Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington's band, or Count Basie.
You could see Ella Fitzgerald at a bar.
And of course, we had Oscar Peterson.
No, my greatest moment that I ever had in the Forum was not when I coached, is when I played. I played my only game in the Montreal Forum. It was after Rocket Richard had been suspended for hitting Al Laco over the head. And they're going to honor Bernie Geoffrion, who won the scoring race. But they're mad at Bernie because he beat out the Rocket, the only time the Rocket had a chance to win the scoring title. So Bernie comes on the ice, and they boo. They booed their own players. It was unbelievable.
I was there when Clarence Campbell suspended the Rocket. The people just began to damaging everything. They turned the trolley cars over. They were going to tear the town down.
Clarence Campbell was this Anglo, telling Rocket Richard that he couldn't play for the Canadiens. I mean, it wasn't just a hockey decision. There was also a cultural, political, a kind of emotional thing that went back to Confederation. I still get pissed off thinking about it.
The place went nuts. They loved the Rocket.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans, United States and Newfoundland.
Well, Saturday night obviously was the hockey night, and then sit with the family, eat blueberry pie. My dad would show up by 7 or 7:30 after a long day at work with the pie, and us boys dug into that, and boy, it made that game great.
Growing up in Hull, Quebec, and going to the Vigier Tavern with my grandfather, the black and white TV stuck up in the corner, the table piled high with draft or quart bottles, and watching the greats like Maurice Richard and Geoffrion play for the Canadiens.
My dad would pull the bed out of the couch in the living room because Mom was in the bedroom watching the color TV, and we would watch Hockey Night in Canada, black and white.
I had to go to bed early. I was like, come on, like 2 more whistles. And oh, that's not fair. That's like icing. Come on, it's not a real whistle.
The victory cheers as the Canadiens would take a game and then going out in the snow and making our way home in the snowfall. Quintessential Canadian memory.
Are you kidding? How does this get better? Unless, you know, I was 5 and Dad introduced me to, you know, beer. And so the year after the riots, Maurice Richard channeled his anger into getting even, and he led Les Canadiens to an unprecedented 5 straight Stanley Cups. And there are a lot of people who believe that the Richard riots were the spark that lit the flame to the Quiet Revolution. And that, well, that brings us smashing into the 60s. So during the 60s, the eyes of the world were all trained on Montreal. You had Expo 67, there was the Summer of Love, Trudeau mania was sweeping all across the country. There was peace, love, and rock and roll. Hell, even John Lennon's Bet-In happened right here. And Quebec was going through its own revolution. The independence movement was gaining strength, but all the while, back on the ice, with Jean Beliveau's leadership, the Habs just kept winning.
So if the Canadiens have their name on the cup the most, you have your name on the cup the second most, and then the Leafs. Like, you have your name on the cup an awful lot of times. And talk about what it means to put on the Canadiens jersey.
It's a dream to one day belong to this organization, to wear the uniform, and after you make the team, it's to win the cup.
I remember coming to our seats, walking by Beliveau, and he was gigantic. I mean, I was 8 years old, and he was on skates. He's 6'3" or something already. But I remember walking around a corner and then going, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I just, wow.
Of course, I swooned over Jean Beliveau. I swooned. He was so gorgeous.
He shook my hand. I tell you, it was one of my greatest thrills I ever had.
He carried himself not only on the ice, but off the ice with such class.
If you ever want to look in the dictionary and see class, John Beliveau would be there.
When I was there was a dynasty. I remember having lunch with a guy one day. He was talking about hockey players. He said, why shouldn't the goalie have a mask like a catcher? So he drew one on the tablecloth, and of course it was Jacques Plante. And he was the first one to use a mask.
In the summertime, he'd work at this garage out on St. Catherine Street. My father used to work there too, so I used to get these signed postcards with him as a goaltender. I used to give him in school and stuff, so that's how I met Jacques Plante when I was a real young kid at that time. The first time I made a record, I was 18, yeah, it was 1966. Yeah. A lot of people were young and everybody wanted to party, so, you know, there was a lot of fun going on. And it got worse after, even more fun.
While Canada celebrated its centennial to the sounds of Bobby Jimby, artists in Quebec were singing, let's call it a different tune.
You're a frog, I'm a frog, kiss me, and I'll turn into a prince.
I was like, I think the first French Canadian to sing at the Forum for at least 10 years was like my trademark, to wear a hockey sweatshirt. And after that, lots of guys used to wear the hockey sweatshirt. But the first French Canadian who wore a hockey sweatshirt was Gratien Gélina.
My grandfather, Gratien Gélina, well, they call him the father of Quebec theater. His first success was Les Fridolinades. Fridolin was a kid playing hockey on the street. And he was talking about his life, about war, about poverty, because it was very difficult times for Quebecers. And Maurice Richard, he saw the play, and after that, he went to see my grandfather. I think he was very moved by the play.
It's the 100th anniversary of the Habs, and I wonder for you, when you walk down the street, different people of different age groups will stop you. What do you hear? What do they tell you the most?
First of all, they say that's Maurice Richard's brother. I've been told that's still.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it doesn't. I don't mind. It's just it's been like this all my life.
He might be the only guy who's got his name on the cup 11 times who's referred to as somebody's brother.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was at the right place at the right time.
Tell me about the 70-71 against Chicago.
If we won that series, a little because of Ken Dryden.
The Montreal Canadiens were not supposed to win the Stanley Cup. The year they brought in a goaltender named Ken Dryden.
Lost in the playoffs to the Montreal Canadiens, and an heralded goal.
The Canadiens were playing the Chicago Blackhawks, and Chicago, in the 7th and deciding game of the Stanley Cup Finals, had them 2-0 in the second period. And the Canadiens came back to win 3-2. And Henri Richard scored 2 goals in that one.
Jean Beliveau was his last game, and his last act as captain of the Canadiens was to carry the Stanley Cup off the ice. Well, that was a remarkable year, remarkable.
I remember the October crisis, and I remember just the stunning experience of walking down the street and seeing tanks. God, I mean, that's what doesn't belong here.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed.
We try to stay away from this political thing. No, we were just working very hard towards a common goal, which was the Stanley Cup.
Your first Stanley Cup, you know, coming after the October crisis, they were thinking that one might have been a part of the healing process.
All I remember was just the incredible emotion in the city at that time. And it was this improbable team doing the improbable of winning the cup in the end, and whether there was any connection to a feeling that emerged out of the October crisis, I don't know.
On a cold February night in 1968, my family and I first set foot in Thetford Mines, Quebec, after having left our island home of Haiti. I could see that the streets were deserted on Saturday nights, but I didn't know why. What was it that was keeping everyone at home? There was a fever, I was told. Hockey fever. That year, the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup. That year, I understood what the Montreal Canadiens represented for my adopted homeland. They were the heroic embodiment of this country's pride, daring, and courage. Best wishes to the Montreal Canadiens as you celebrate your 100th anniversary. Go Habs, go!
When I was a kid, watching the Montreal Canadiens, it's the allure.
Here, the hockey team is like a religion.
Everybody adores them. It's like the biggest sport in Canada, right?
And everybody that loves hockey dreams one day of becoming, you know, a hockey star.
Every kid's dream is to be a Montreal Canadian.
Being Canadian, you're born with it. It's just like maple syrup.
When it's all said and done, you know, hockey's always going to be #1.
So if the seminal moment of the 60s was Expo 67 and the soundtrack to that were all the hippies and such, in the 70s, well, the seminal moment were the 76 Summer Games, the Olympics. Of course, you see Olympic Stadium right behind me here. The soundtrack to that, though, was the good old-fashioned disco where everybody was wearing really weird and nasty clothes, including the Habs, most notably Guy Lafleur, but the Habs kept on winning.
You know, you have to understand when you're growing up in a city, you know, those are your formative years. Things take on meaning. The downtown area, you know, the Crescent area, you know, I'd gigged so many times.
When I arrived in Montreal, it was something unbelievable. I didn't know if I was in North America or in Europe. I recorded that song in, gosh, it's 30 some odd years ago.
We were always ending up in these places, you know, after hours bars, jazz clubs, anything around the Forum, you know. And there'd be Guy with his friends, you know, smoking up a storm and drinking up a storm.
This was that free spirit of that time.
The kind of Studio 54 kind of mentality that Lafleur was such a great symbol of.
In the modern era, with all the technology and can take pictures on phones and all that, there's a lot less crazy stuff happening than there used to.
You put out a record? Did you put out a disco record?
Yeah, I was the one who invented the rap music.
Stand straight. Stand straight. With your feet shoulder-width apart. Now, bend your knees. Just your knees.
Gee, we did, it was hockey lessons with the group Toulouse in the background. So, did it for the fun of it.
Sure. Whenever you talk about the Canadiens and playing in Montreal, so much of it is on the ice, but then there's a huge part of it that's not even on the ice. It's what happens afterwards. It's the party in this city, the nightlife in this city. You must have had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're in the party 7 days a week.
Play 5.
We used to love to play guilty, you know.
Yeah.
That's why we won. That's why we were winning, maybe.
The mark of a great scorer is consistency.
I remember Guy Lafleur, because he was friendly with my dad. They became friendly in Tremblant on the racetrack.
When I sang the national anthem, Guy Lafleur was there. And he looked at me and he said, "You sing it, girlie." Guy Lafleur. And I sang it, man. It was great.
I learned my very first French line before learning French in school, and that was the first star, la première étoile, Guy Lafleur.
My father was a dyed-in-the-wool Canadiens fan. We got him a Guy Lafleur shirt for Christmas one year, and he wore that Guy Lafleur shirt for every hockey game.
The Montreal Canadiens of the National Hockey League.
Petrov is coming down to the Canadian side. He's hit over the line.
I think one of the greatest hockey games that I've ever seen was that incredible New Year's Eve game. And I actually got fired from a gig in London, Ontario, the Seeps. I refused to go on stage because I wanted to see the game. It was that riveting.
What do you remember from that game? What that meant to the franchise?
Games like that the Canadians have participated in have sort of tattooed or made an emblem on the team around the world.
We were the best, they were the best, and this was finally that chance to play.
That game really needs to be put into focus by reconstructing where we were with Iron Curtain, communist country.
I mean, you'll never have that again, unless Cuba gets a hockey team.
We should have won it by a large margin, but Tretiak stood on his head.
The non-definitive result, the 3-3 tie, almost makes it more memorable.
The game is over.
It was just a great game.
Certainly in your career, in a time when politics and the language debate in this country was so divisive, what was it like the night Levesque won?
It was unlike any other night. Literally, I am sure that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of instances in that crowd where people had been sitting side by side year after year as season ticket holders with their team in common, that they found out something about that other person that they didn't know.
Wow.
And I would bet that that relationship was never the same again.
But the relationship between the fans and the team became stronger than ever as the Habs went on to hoist the Holy Grail 4 consecutive times.
It was a special time, the 70s. I was lucky to become Canadiens fan at that time. It was a great era.
The greatest team that ever was the 76 Canadiens, that voted the greatest team.
They had a lot of flair. They had a lot of style. It was that beautiful, that artistic.
They only lost one game all year at home. Of course, it was to us, but it was murder going in there. The crowd was beautiful.
The team was a big family. We stick together, you know, no matter what happened, and that's why we had so much success.
The characters in the Forum became larger than life. Don Cherry knows all about that.
We had the Stanley Cup right in our hands.
Very close for the Bruins winning that series against the Canadiens.
This was the 7th game, as everybody knows, and whoever won this game was going to win the Stanley Cup. With 1:43 to go, we had too many guys on the ice.
Cherry's on the bench, raising his arms like this.
Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur.
Only Lafleur could have put it along the ice in that far corner, tied up the game. They went on to win the Stanley Cup.
For the fourth consecutive time.
The Canadians are great at parades. I mean, you know, you get good when you do it all the time.
Certainly. As the decade closed, the Canadiens and the country would face new unforeseen challenges.
Vous êtes en train de dire à la prochaine fois.
All right, well, Montreal is back now. You got to know, in the 80s, Quebec started to struggle. It was just after the referendum. There was endless political squabbling. Hundreds of thousands of Anglos fled the province. Unemployment was high. Hell, we're just a few steps from the Forum. This neighborhood used to be hopping, and then in the 80s, it wasn't.
Fortunate enough to be able to play the Hockey Shrine Montreal Forum, and Larry Robinson just finished his hockey practice and gave me this shirt and signed it, took it right off his back, and it was a great thrill for me.
In the 80s, we used to hang out mostly on Saint Laurent Street, on the main. It was the whole punk new wave thing in Montreal was starting to happen.
If you wanted to do music in the 80s, you had to be confident. And Patrick Roy is the epitome of that.
To nobody's surprise, here's the winner of the Conn Smythe Trophy, Patrick Roy.
All right, so as the 80s hit, obviously the Montreal Canadiens dynasty was over, and the years of dominating, well, they were done. But there were two bright spots, 86 and 1993, two Stanley Cups. And everybody knows you don't get those cups without number 33, Patrick Roy. And after much controversy, tonight, the prodigal son comes home as the 33 goes to the rafters of the Bell Center.
Every kid goaltender from Montreal to Rimouski was doing his ticks for the past 20 years, you know, and of course...
I was actually winking at everyone that was trying to go. Every time I was stopping go, I was like...
It's all in the eyes, and you could see it when he played. It's just like his eyes were like, wow.
Patrick Roy just stopped the puck, and then he looked at him and winked.
He didn't have to say anything. Patrick Roy just looked at the guy and said, give me your best, because it ain't good enough.
Every game that he played is like it was the last.
I started into a time when our team was on a downswing, and not the best time to be the captain.
People couldn't believe that it had been, what, it was 6 years prior to that they hadn't won a Stanley Cup, and this was the end of the world.
We won with a team that wasn't as well known. But when I look back at the 86 team, we had a good team.
Stéphane Richer, Claude Lemieux.
Mats Naslund, number 26, a small Viking.
We had Robinson, Chelios.
Brian Skrudlin.
Yeah. It was game one, and it went to overtime.
On the face-off, McPhee brings it in with Skrudlin. He scores!
Skrudlin scored so dang fast.
9 seconds is all it took.
It's Lemieux! And we're like, and there's this big pause. Skrudland! And the milkshakes go all over the car. Like, it's just dripping down. The windshield is covered. My dad is running through, like, stop signs. So the car smelled really nice for a year. What's that flavor? It's chocolate milkshake. Why is that? Brian Skrudland.
But Patrick Roy, he's the guy who carried us through the playoffs that year. He was the MVP. He was the star player. And I got a lot of recognition of it because I was the captain.
There's a Cinderella story about Patrick Roy. There's also a Cinderella story about Celine Dion.
Back in '83, few people in Quebec could imagine that 15-year-old Celine Dion was destined to become the world's best-selling female artist of all time.
C'est grâce à mes deux impresarios, Anne et René Angélil.
If you ask me if Celine and the Montreal Canadiens have some similarities, yeah, I would say that they're both known all over the world.
But it wasn't all new wave and pop ballads. Now, in the 80s, Quebec had its fair share of rockers.
of the reasons why players love to play here is because the nightlife can be very, you know, exciting, which can be good, but it can also get them in a lot of trouble. No place is more notorious than Chez Paree. In this city, there are a lot of distractions, not the least of which is Chez Paree. Managing players in this city, what's that like?
I don't want to be their father. They have to respect the curfew or respect their teammates.
The Chez Paree, when I was playing there, it was a beautiful club. And then later on, when I went in there as a manager, it was a altogether different type of a night of entertainment.
When you were a player, did you ever break curfew?
A couple times.
Did you get caught?
A couple times.
Did you play?
No.
Did you ever break curfew?
Yes.
Did you get caught?
No.
Never?
No. It was too late. They could have got me.
Coaches were already asleep at that time.
In 1992-93, Canadiens were in the playoffs against the New York Islanders. The Islanders loved the Chez Paree. They were rolling out of there about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the next day at the Forum in Montreal, the Canadiens kicked them about 7-1 in the playoffs and went on, of course, you know, to win the Stanley Cup that year.
My greatest Habs Stanley Cup memory, and I was shooting Tombstone. The Kings make it to the Stanley Cup final. And all these guys, you know, Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer, they had discovered Wayne Gretzky. And how could the Kings lose? There's no way they could lose.
Gretzky gets set, dropped it back. McSorley, great save by Waugh.
So I started taking bets. A little over $10,000 in bets out there with everybody.
I went with 3 of my buddies in Los Angeles. Everything was cool, everything was going good until they scored in overtime, the Montreal Canadiens.
They score! Another overtime victory for the Canadiens.
We went up cheering. Oh, they really wanted to kill us, and I remember us running to get out of this arena as soon as we could.
Kings are leading all the way through game 2. Jacques Demers gets the illegal stick call. He goes to the penalty box, pulls Patrick Waugh. So they got 6 on 4.
Desjardins shot, score!
And then in overtime, Desjardins scores. Kings never won that game in the series, and you know, Habs just rolled over them, and that was it. I had a big, fat wad of cash in my pocket.
The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
I'm happy that he's coming back as a Montreal Canadian. I think he started his career here. He became probably who he is because of Montreal, and to have his jersey retire is a great honor.
All right, so the dark days that seemed to be the 80s and the 90s were behind the Bleu, Blanc, et Rouge, and Bob Gainey and Guy Carbonneau seemed to have the team back as regular contenders, just as the energy was starting to come back on the ice. As is always the case with the Canadiens, the art and music scene in Montreal was back as well.
Hello, I'm Rick Mercer, and I want to congratulate the Montreal Canadiens on 100 years of great hockey. Now, this franchise has had so many highlights in those 100 years, many of them near and dear to my heart. Jacques Plante and his contribution to quality facial protection, Ken Dryden's dedication to public life, and, of course, Bernie Geoffrion, with whom I share a nickname, Boom Boom. Go Habs.
You know what makes a great team? I'll tell you what makes a great team. A rivalry. That's what makes a great team.
Between Montreal and Quebec, it was always very interesting when those two teams were playing against each other.
Well, you know, obviously I'm from Vancouver, so I'm a Canucks fan.
I know that hack Jay Priestley is like pulls for the Canucks. Seriously? Like, but what's that guy doing? I mean, what's he thinking?
There was definitely a rivalry in our house.
My older brother, he was a Boston Bruins fan, and all my dad and my uncles and stuff were all Detroit Red Wings fans.
And my father was unwavering in his support of the Montreal Canadiens, and my brothers were unwavering in their support of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
So nobody liked Montreal Canadiens in Petty Harbor except me and like 2 other guys.
My grandfather, he didn't hate much, but he hated the Montreal Canadiens.
I actually remember one time getting hit in the head with an ashtray at my grandfather's house when Cam Connor scored the winning goal.
My father was a very quiet man. He didn't say much, but he just grinned a lot because they won all the time.
I'm a Maple Leafs fan, but we just don't have the history. Rocket Richard? It's just not fair. It's not fair, Montreal.
The mid-90s brings another referendum, an ice storm hits Montreal, Patrick Roy storms off the team, but the city itself experiences a financial and cultural renaissance.
All right, this is Saint Laurent. This is a very important street in the story of Montreal. This is the street that divides East and West. That, for the most part, still divides French and English culture. But also, this place is littered with places for bands to play, bands that are part of the new Montreal sound. Bands like the Deers and the Stills and Arcade Fire, and of course, the Sam Roberts Band.
What cultural factors play into, you know, the rise of so many great bands? Maybe toiling away in obscurity for years gives you a pressure-free environment in which to create.
You know, all roads are leading to Montreal for independent rock, it seems. We knew, and the cool people in New York and Los Angeles knew about it, but that was it. Now, all of a sudden, flash forward a couple of years, and Spin Magazine publishes a map, literally, of St. Lawrence Boulevard, talking about all the bars to go to.
Many a night watching a hockey game in Montreal, the crowd was not from Montreal. They all made the drive to this city to watch a game and experience the nightlife. Tons of rock and roll bars, places like this. And for me, when I was 18, exactly this place.
If you talk about Simple Plan, or if you talk about the Stills that come out there, have defined it. Arcade Fire have defined them. And these are groups also where you've got Francophone and Anglophone up on stage singing together.
We'd start rolling in Toronto or Vancouver, and people are like, have you ever heard of Malajib? They're a great band, you know? They sing in French, but people really, really connecting with them.
And there's certain things, I think, where we put politics aside. And whether it's when you get on the ice or you get on the stage. And those are moments where we show what we can accomplish when we're working together.
I think everyone gets along. They just scream, go Habs, go, you know? It's not French, it's not English. It's just go Habs, go.
And in cinema, Quebecois and English Canadian filmmakers are collaborating on box office hits.
In Lord of the Rings, you know, I wore the old beat-up white classic Montreal Canadiens t-shirt. I would wear that under the Aragorn clothes. It gave me just a little more power with the sword, I think.
The Rocket.
Things have to change! When I decided to do the Rocket, I already felt that he meant more. That his story was more than just the story of a hockey player. I want the Rocket!
Maurice Richard inspired me in everything by his way of wanting to win and to be serious about it and passionate. He's my hero.
Et c'est un privilège pour René et moi ce soir de vous remettre cette rondelle en main.
The hockey game I remember best with my father, Maurice Richard being applauded for like 10 minutes. Just the energy in that room really it reinforced the strength of this team in our local psyche.
Maurice Richard, quand il lance, l'Amérique hurle. Quand il compte, les sourds entendent. Quand il est puni, les lignes téléphoniques sautent. Quand il passe, les recrues rêvent. C'est le vent qui patine. C'est tout le Québec debout, qui fait peur et qui vit. Félix Leclerc.
You're the greatest team, the greatest food, the greatest art scene. What else is there?
Well, there's also great festivals, comedy, fireworks, and, of course, the Jazz Festival.
That was like the first real show that I ever did, and it was in front of 125,000 people, so that was amazing.
There's just a vibration in Montreal, the environment, the language, the different cultures mixed together.
One of the things about Montreal that has really added to its culinary culture is that the immigration it's had has brought with it these fantastic flavors.
When I first came up here, it took a long time for my food to come to the table. You know, coming up from the States, you know, they sit you down, get you the food, and then you're out of here. But up here in Montreal, it's an event.
Before this was a movie theater, it was a hockey stadium, and I truly believe that the
24 Stanley Cups that we have are, the spirits of them are absorbed into this ground.
I think we should bring the spirits of Geoffrion and Richard. I would love to entrap some of their ectoplasm and spread it on the ice in the new form.
And while the Spirits did take a while to find the new arena, legend has it they arrived at the Bell Center when, after a long battle against cancer, Captain Saku Koivu returned to the ice.
I was at that game where he made his return, and anybody who doubts his heart, just look at what he's done and what he's accomplished. Not only for what he's done on the ice, but also what he's done off the ice with his charity work and stuff like that, yeah.
And I say, well, it's just an ordinary day, and it's all
Talk about some of the bands that played and the foundation.
The headliners were Great Big Sea, who are from Newfoundland.
We basically offered our, our services to anything he wanted to do.
And, Sam Roberts, who's a local rock and roll guy, and they set the tone for the night, which was really a lot of fun. We had a great night, and we've raised some money.
We mutually respect each other's efforts to make the local community better.
I want to read a passage from your book where you talk about this team being sort of a metaphor for Canada, a fine example of different ethnic and linguistic groups working together to achieve great things. Language and cultural differences never cause problems between the players. And then you go on to say you're always proud to be a Canadian and a Canadien. You know,
well, it's exactly what I mentioned in my book. And that's the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Montreal Canadiens Hall of Famers.
When you had English guys like Ken Dryden, and you had the French guys like Guy Lafleur, the Flying Frenchman out there, they were one. And when they were one, we were one. And that was a great reminder of what we could be.
Everybody can work together and be successful, and a place where people could look and say, why it can't happen in other areas.
We've managed to coexist for hundreds of years, whereas you never would have thought it possible, you know. If you came from old world Europe, that you'd see French and English people coexisting like this, and not just coexisting, but using the differences between us to make, in my mind, the best city in the world.
There is something so passionately unifying about a love for hockey and about a love for the Montreal Canadiens.
The Montreal Canadiens as a sports franchise are the way much of the city, but much of Quebec speaks to the world.
We resonate with people in Montreal, which is a very mixed island of people. We resonate with people in the province of Quebec, with Francophones, Anglophones, different places in the Maritimes, in Alberta, in BC. And so I think we're a good bridge for the whole package.
The Montreal Canadiens, 100 years, 100 stars. And it's always important to remember, it's not just the names on the back, but it's also the crest on the front and the faces in the stands. No matter where you go around the world, people are wearing the red, white, and blue. And even the most ardent Habs hater has a begrudging respect for the most storied franchise in NHL history. And trust me, as a Toronto kid growing up a diehard Habs fan, I know all too well how hard that can be. Thanks for watching.
I remember the 50th anniversary of the Montreal Canadiens. I was just a kid, but I'll never forget watching on television the Rockets scoring goals in that great year, 58-59. Well, 50 years on, 100th anniversary of the Montreal Canadiens, and the country is still as excited as ever. Happy anniversary to the Habs.
City of night, 1,000 colors, ocean of light among the shadows, under the stars, the world seems brighter. City of night will shine forever.